Country does not stop a migrant caravan of 4,000 heading toward the U.S. He will call on the U.S. military to help close the southern border if the, quote, onslaught is not stopped. He also says he'll cut off aid to several Central American nations. So we're watching this story. It's breaking right now here in America's Newsroom, and so too is this. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, meets with the president today, about an hour from now. Full debrief on what he learned in Saudi Arabia and in Turkey. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer, live on a Thursday morning here. How you doing,
we got a packed show for you at home. Buckle up. I'm Julie Banderas in for Sandra Smith. Pompeo returning from an emergency overseas mission where he met with Saudi and Turkish leaders in an effort to find answers about Khashoggi's disappearance and presumed death. President Trump has been saying he is waiting to hear all of the evidence and facts before making any decisions.
They're an important ally, but I want to find out what happened, where is the fault, and we will probably know that by the end of the week. But Mike Pompeo is coming back. We're going to have a long talk.
Have you asked for this audio, video intelligence that the Turks are supposed
We have asked for it if it exists. We have asked for it. Yeah.
But you haven't got
We've asked for it if it exists.
Are you surprised that they haven't turned it over? Or?
No, I'm not sure yet that it exists. Probably does, possibly does. I'll have a full report on that from Mike when he comes back.
Mr. President,
that's one of the things that's going to be the first question I ask.
Rich Edson leads our coverage live at the State Department. Rich, good to see you. What do you expect from the briefing today, Pompeo and the president?
Yeah, Bill, this will be a full accounting of 2 days of meetings that the secretary had in Saudi Arabia and then in Turkey. The president has already been dialed into a number of conversations. Certainly, the president spoke with Mohammed bin Salman while he was meeting with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. So this will be a fuller readout on those conversations. The Turkish government, through Turkish media, claims their investigation indicates Saudi responsibility and connections to the Crown Prince. The Associated Press, citing Turkish media and surveillance photos, reports a man who has traveled with the Crown Prince entered the Saudi consulate just before Jamal Khashoggi arrived. The outlet also reports the man later checked out of a Turkish hotel with a large suitcase the day Khashoggi disappeared. The secretary has said the U.S. is giving Saudi Arabia and Turkey space to conduct their investigations, though there is a growing pressure on the Saudi Crown Prince. After the investigation, the secretary says the U.S. will decide its response. The secretary has also stressed the administration considers the strong business and government ties between the two countries. Democrats and Republicans in Congress are pushing for a stronger response. Some are calling for sanctions. Some are calling to end arms sales between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. As for the secretary, he'll meet with the president, then on to a separate trip to Panama and Mexico.
Wow, full load there, full schedule. The Post today, Washington Post published what appears to be Khashoggi's final column. What did it say?
It is lamenting the lack of press freedom in the Arab world. The editors say that they received this column from Khashoggi's assistant and translator just after he disappeared in Istanbul on October 2nd. In this column, he writes, quote, Arab governments have been given free rein to continue silencing the media at an increasing rate. And he continues, the Arab world is facing its own version of an iron curtain, imposed not by external actors, but through domestic forces vying for power. The editor of this said that they were holding off on publishing this because they thought that Khashoggi would return and work on this. Now says that they now accept that that is not going to happen. Khashoggi's family is calling for an independent investigation from an international body to try to figure this out.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Rich Edson, more to come from the State Department. Thank you, sir. Good to see you there. Julie.
All right. Meanwhile, former FBI Attorney James Baker set to testify again before the House Judiciary Committee this morning for the second time in 2 weeks. House Republicans want more information about claims that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein pushed a plan to secretly record the president. Mike Emanuel is live outside the hearing room now with more. This is going to be an indoor, closed-door meeting again. Mike, why is today's session so important?
Well, Julie, good morning to you. Sources familiar say that this former FBI counsel has been the most informative interview they've had in terms of looking into the FBI's investigation of the Trump campaign. His name is James Baker, the former FBI counsel who appeared before House lawmakers 2 weeks ago but had to leave after a few hours. Lawmakers want to speak to him about the report. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was willing to wear a wire to record President Trump and had spoken about using the 25th Amendment to remove the president president from office. Lawmakers say if James Baker took Rosenstein seriously, they want to know what Baker did about it. That explosive story came to light due to Andrew McCabe, who was acting bureau director. Were there subsequent meetings? Who was in those meetings, and what actions were taken? Meanwhile, big picture, President Trump was asked about the Robert Mueller Russia probe on 60 Minutes.
I don't pledge anything, but I will tell you, I have no intention of doing that. I think it's a very unfair investigation because there was no collusion of any kind.
But you won't
pledge? There is no collusion. I don't want to pledge. Why should I pledge to you? If I pledge, I'll pledge. I don't have to pledge to you, but I have no intention of doing it.
No intention of shutting down the Russia probe. Julie?
What are next steps in this House probe?
Well, obviously a critical hearing today with James Baker, but after this they want to speak with Nellie Orr. Nellie Orr worked for Fusion GPS, the firm behind the controversial dossier. She's also married to Bruce Orr, a specialist who met with former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele. Lawmakers are also expected to hear from George Papadopoulos in a closed-door deposition as soon as next week. Meanwhile, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein talked to the Wall Street Journal saying, quote, "People are entitled to be frustrated. I can accept that. But at the end of the day, the public will have confidence that the cases we brought were warranted by the evidence and that it was an appropriate use of resources." Members of House Judiciary and Oversight desperately want to get Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein up here to Capitol Hill to ask him questions about all of these matters. Julie?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. We've got much more on this story straight ahead. Congressman Jim Jordan, who sits on the House Judiciary Committee, joins us at the bottom of the hour to tell us what he wants to hear from Baker. I'll be speaking with him. Also, our headliner today, John Pistol, former Deputy Director of the FBI, will weigh in. That's coming up in 1 hour at 10 o'clock.
President Trump asked the question in 2016, what do you have to lose? And most people said not much. They saw no hope with Hillary Clinton. Let me tell you, in 2018, if Democrats take over, you got a lot to lose.
Lindsey Graham there with a warning for Republicans. Midterms 19 days away. The president's going to hit the road again. 3 states where the races are too close to call. Here's Chris Starwalt from D.C. How are you, sir? You got your
I hope they're still too close to call. We still have two and a half weeks to the election. Don't put too much pressure on the decision desk, Bill.
I got you. Okay, let's start in Montana, huh? Because the last poll was a month ago. You got Matt Rosendale, the state auditor, against John Tester, the Democrat, running for re-election there. The average is 3-point difference, but I don't know where this state is today, Chris.
Well, Montana is, as always, independent. It's hard to put Montana in a political box. Yes, it is definitely a red state, but it's a state Barack Obama very nearly carried in 2008. It's an independent-minded state, and it will not be put in a political box. John Tester is a tough out. I would say he and Joe Manchin are sort of in the same category as the kind of Democrats who do represent red states, but who connect with their voters on a different level in a different way.
Okay, so Montana is one of these states Republicans think they can flip. And then it's off to Arizona for the president and then Nevada by the end of the week. By the way, Joe Biden, I think, is in Nevada next week. So, too, is Barack Obama. So you see what the stakes are. This is what our Fox polling found last night. We put it out at 6 o'clock. Vote for Congress in your district. A 7-point gap between Democrats and Republicans, in favor of Democrats, which is the same 7-point gap from a month ago. You rarely see this, don't you?
We have seen a remarkable constancy this year. Going back to the winter, really, after there was the weird effect of the tax cut went through, and it was first a negative, then a positive for Republicans. It ping-ponged a little bit there for a second. But we've been at about 7 points for most of the year. That's about where the average of the Democratic advantage in the generic ballot is. Now, there's a red wall out there. Democrats need to do better than even in order to gain seats. They've got to do 3-4 points better just to gain seats. This puts them at a number where they can win the House, probably not the Senate. But it's shaping up to be the race that we've seen for a long time.
So you're crunching numbers every day with our team here. And on the House side, you're trying to figure out which races are legitimate toss-ups. I think at last count it was 31. 31 races in the House. Are those mostly in Republican-held districts or Democratic districts?
They just mostly in Republican-held districts. All but 2 are Republican seats. And that's the challenge for Republicans. They have to limit Democratic gains to 23. There's a bunch of seats that Republicans know are gone. There are a bunch of seats that they're not even contesting. That means that Democrats really out of these toss-ups only need a dozen or maybe 13 seats out of these toss-ups in order to win. And that's the reality that Republicans have been dealing with for a long time. In the same way that the Senate map is very good for Republicans this cycle just because of where the races are, the reality for Republicans this time on the House is they have been toting water uphill from the beginning.
Oh, okay, so there will be drama. I do know that.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, Kavanaugh was a surprise. We could get another surprise on either side over 19 days. Anything can happen there. Final word. Got to roll.
In 19 days, anything can happen in 2018, so we'll be here.
Thank you, sir. See you soon in New York, okay? Chris Tyrewell, there he is. Talk to you soon. Thanks. 11 past.
Breaking news as we await a big meeting between President Trump and Secretary Pompeo. The Trump administration urging caution as we await answers and facts on the columnist disappearance, stressing the Saudis' role in the U.S. fight against terrorism and Iran. We're going to be digging into all of that.
Also, Julie, a government employee under arrest charged with leaking the confidential financial information of former Trump officials. So details on what they found there in a moment.
And also breaking news in the case of a missing Wisconsin girl whose parents were both murdered. What we know now about the moments before Jamie Kloss disappeared.
We believe Jamie was in the home at the time of the homicides, and we believe she is still in danger.
Again, our goal to bring Jamie home, that's our only goal.
President Trump out with a warning for Mexico. If officials there don't stop a caravan of 4,000 immigrants heading toward the U.S., the president this morning tweeting, and I'm reading as, quote, in addition to stopping all payments to these countries, which seem to have almost no control over their population, I must, in the strongest of terms, ask Mexico to stop this onslaught. And if unable to do so, I will call up the U.S. military and close our southern border. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, of course, expected to visit Central America to talk with leaders about the issue.
He's going everywhere, right? Here's the president now. Check it out.
Saudi Arabia has been a very important ally of ours in the Middle East. We are stopping Iran. We're not trying to stop. We're stopping Iran. We went a big step when we took away that ridiculous deal that was made by the previous administration. The Iran deal, which was $150 billion to $1.8 billion in cash. What was that all about? And they are an ally. We have other very good allies in the Middle East.
So there was the president on the importance of Saudi Arabia, the relationship between our two countries, Iran, terrorism, gas prices, human rights. It's all part of this equation. Daniel Hoffman, former CIA chief of station, Fox News contributor. Daniel, good morning to you. You make the point quite well. When you have major incidents like these, get them solved soon because they do not age well with time. Is that right?
It is. You know, early in my career at CIA, a senior U.S. government official told me that diplomatic incidents, flaps, they're not like fine wine that get better with age. It's best to collect the facts with alacrity and accuracy, get out front and make policy quickly so that you own the dialogue and then avoid collateral damage.
Okay, so Pompeo meets with the president about an hour. How do you gauge how judicious they have been during this process?
Well, I think the first thing, and the president has highlighted this, Secretary Pompeo will sit with the president and review what we know and answer the key questions. And for me, we know a lot. We know that 15 Saudis traveled on a Gulf Stream to Turkey, to Istanbul, that they entered the consulate shortly after Khashoggi. But three things we don't know. We don't know what exactly were the orders that were given to these 15 Saudis. We don't know who gave the orders. We don't know if they carried out the orders as they were intended. And then we don't know about post-mortem who reported to whom based on what happened inside that consulate. I think Secretary Pompeo would likely take all of the intelligence collection, his interaction officially with Saudi and Turkish officials, and deliver that to the president so that the president can make effective policy.
Okay, so what Pompeo talked about was facts, and they are not all public yet. But all the facts so far have come from Turkey. And then we have this from the Washington Post. Khashoggi apparently penned an op-ed in the final days. He said this: Arab governments have been given free rein to continue silencing the media at an increasing rate, but these governments, whose very existence relies on the control of information, have aggressively blocked the internet. They have also arrested local reporters and pressured advertisers to harm the revenue of specific publications. The Arab world is facing its own version of an iron curtain, imposed not by external actors but through domestic forces vying for power. That could be a shot at the royal family and current leadership in Saudi Arabia, I'd guess.
It is. I think he's trying to paint a picture there with that Soviet reference that I'm not quite sure applies extraordinarily well, but to an idea of almost a clash of civilization where there is freedom of the press in the West that doesn't exist in much of the Middle East. Viewers will recall that when Canadian officials criticized the Saudis and called on the release of jailed human rights activists, that Mohammed bin Salman expelled the Canadian ambassador and discontinued discussions on trade and investment. So there is some sensitivity in the kingdom, for sure, long-standing sensitivity to those who dissent from the official view.
I think this is... Daniel, this administration has so much on the line here. I mean, they've built a Middle East relationship, to include significantly Saudi Arabia, whether it's ties with Iran or gas prices or the war on terror. All that right now, all that strategy is wrapped up in this.
Right, and one of the things that's important is to keep some of our relationship immune to the vagaries of our bilateral relationships. So you want to keep the intelligence collaboration we enjoy, which is so vital to our interests and to protecting our citizens and our homeland. You want to keep that immune from these issues. But you're absolutely right. It's awfully hard to thread the needle, simultaneously sanction a country or, my goodness, freeze military sales, and at the same time rely on them as a strategic partner in the Middle East and your primary ally against Iran. That's what Secretary Pompeo and the President, I'm quite sure, will be discussing today.
You're an excellent guest. Just last point here. How do you see this unwinding itself?
Well, I think we're going to see the Congress expressing, and if you're looking for bipartisan collaboration in the Congress, we're seeing it here. You've got Democrats and Republicans out front on this issue. I wouldn't be surprised if we see open testimony, and I'm sure we'll see...
Hours time. Thank you, Daniel Hoffman, with your insight today. Thank you, sir.
So with the midterms just weeks away, concerns linger. Malicious actors on social media may compromise the integrity of our elections. Facebook's head of security, cybersecurity, joins us later in the hour to discuss their efforts as well as the massive 50 million person data breach.
Also, our nation's highest military honor awarded to a true American hero.
John's fellow Marines have described him as a Marine warrior, and I can see it, who is bigger than life and beyond the reach of death. He is truly larger than life.
President Trump awarding the Medal of Honor to a retired Marine and Vietnam War veteran, Sergeant Major John Canley. More than once risked his life to help his fellow Marines during the Battle of Hue, Central Vietnam, one of the bloodiest of that war. Here's the president commending him at the White House just yesterday.
He is truly larger than life. John, it is because of your extraordinary personality and being and whatever it takes that really do something very special for our country. There are very few brave people, but very, very few like you, John.
First Lady also extending her gratitude, saying, quote, "Thank you, Sergeant Major John Canley, for your service to our nation. It was an honor to have you and your family at the White House to receive the Medal of Honor for your heroic actions and leadership under enemy fire."
A senior Treasury Department employee has been arrested and charged with leaking financial documents regarding former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, as well as other key figures in the Mueller probe, and here she is. Prosecutors say this suspect called herself a whistleblower. She was caught with a flash drive in her hand. Griff Jenkins is live in Washington. Griff, who is this woman?
Hey, Julie. Her name is Natalie Mayflower Sowers Edwards, a top Treasury official working in the department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN as it's known. She's charged with leaking confidential financial documents of former Trump officials to a journalist. Edwards was arrested late Tuesday with a flash drive in hand that contained hundreds of documents, among them several suspicious activity reports, or SARs, to an unnamed news organization. These reports dated from October 2017 to present and included included the financial transactions of Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, campaign official Rick Gates, and accused Russian agent Maria Butina. Court documents show the unlawful disclosure to the reporter was the substance of approximately 12 news articles published by the news organization that wasn't named. Edwards also was in possession of a cell phone containing numerous communications in which she transmitted the information to the reporter. And as you mentioned, Edwards calls herself a whistleblower in all of this. Officials don't say so.
Okay, so then what are officials saying about this?
They're saying that Edwards is charged with one count of unauthorized disclosure of suspicious activity and one count of conspiracy to make them. And that carries a sentence of 5 years in prison for each. The U.S. attorney in charge of this case, Jeffrey Berman, said in a statement that Edwards betrayed her position of trust by repeatedly disclosing highly sensitive information, and added this: "We hope today's charges remind those in positions of trust within government agencies that the unlawful sharing of sensitive documents will not be tolerated and will be met with swift justice by this office." And Julie, it's interesting to note this case is the first criminal prosecution arising from leaks about individuals targeted by Mueller's probe. Julie?
All right, Griff Jenkins in Washington. Thank you, Bill.
So Nancy Pelosi is being used as a powerful campaign tool, not for Democrats, however. Republicans, how they're trying to co-opt her and her message for the midterms 19 days away.
Plus this, a former FBI attorney getting set to speak before a House committee about what he knows regarding those Rod Rosenstein wiretapping claims. Congressman Jim Jordan is one of the lawmakers who will be asking some tough questions this morning. He'll join us next.
Also, the voice of two beloved Sesame Street characters are now saying goodbye for now.
On my way to where the air is safe. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street?
All right, 9:31 in New York. You know what time that is. Big board check right now. We're off about 100 points at the open here. A lot of this coming from, well, the drag on equities and the stock market after the Fed yesterday said it's keeping a close eye on interest rates right now. It likes the movement of the economy, and with that, the Fed likes to make moves sometimes, suggesting next year that it will continue to look at more interest rate rises, maybe a quarter point here, maybe a quarter point there.
Yeah.
You know, the president doesn't like it. He made that pretty clear this past week. But
Right.
The Fed's going to do what the Fed does, and we'll see the result of that. GDP's coming out, I think, in about 10 days' time.
Yeah.
And Larry Kudlow has insisted that we're going to see 4% growth again. And that's going to hit about 2 weeks prior to the election, a little less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, that'll
prior
be
to
interesting
midterms.
to see how that plays out.
Yes, it will.
politically.
So anyway, the
All right.
economy's cooking. We'll see where we go today.
All right. Back to one of our top stories this morning. Former FBI attorney James Baker soon to reappear before the House Judiciary Committee for yet another high-stakes hearing. Baker expected to face tough questions about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and those wiretap claims. Let's bring in Congressman Jim Jordan, who sits on the committee and will be in that room asking questions today. Congressman, always great to see you, and good morning to you.
With you, Julie.
I should note that it's interesting to make note that Baker had a close working relationship with former FBI Director James Comey before he left the Bureau. You will be in today's closed-door meeting. What questions do you have for James Baker?
I think the first area where we start is, look, Andrew McCabe, Lisa Page met with Rod Rosenstein, where Mr. Rosenstein said that he was thinking about actually recording the commander-in-chief in the Oval Office, recording the President of the United States. Right after that meeting, Mr. McCabe, Ms. Page come and talk to Jim Baker. And he took that very seriously, what was discussed in that previous meeting. I want to go from there. What did you guys do? Was there some kind of legal analysis of actually looking to record the President of the United States? What subsequent meetings took place? So I think those are the first set of questions, first series of questions we'll ask Mr. Baker, and then a host of other things we've got to get to as well.
Right. So in just about 30 minutes or now, you'll have a chance to ask those questions. He will be testifying after some explosive testimony yesterday where he basically called the Russia probe being handled in an abnormal fashion, and also mentioned that it reflected political bias. That's a quote. This is no surprise. I'm not sure if Democrats seem surprised by this, given the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page texts. But is political bias here enough to derail the politically driven Mueller probe?
Well, I do think it was interesting that yesterday Rod Rosenstein has time to sit down with the Wall Street Journal, do a big, long interview where he says the Mueller investigation is appropriate and moving in the right direction, and yet he can't come talk to Congress about the idea that he made a statement about recording the President of the United States? Remember, Rosenstein's the guy who picked Mueller in the first place. So that, to me, is the most frustrating part. Rod Rosenstein, you got time for an interview where you say the Mueller investigation is appropriate and independent, but you can't answer Congress's questions about something you said in a meeting with the deputy head of the FBI at a time when he was, frankly, acting head of the FBI because Mr. Comey had been fired by the memo you wrote. So the fact that Rod Rosenstein was a no-show last week is something that is just not right. He's obligated, as a guy who is Senate confirmed, when the chairman of the committee that has jurisdiction over your agency asks you to come to Congress and testify, you were obligated to do that, and you're supposed to do it under oath, and he was a no-show, yet he's got time to talk to the press about the Mueller investigation.
I want to
Give
read
me
a portion of his interview, Rosenstein's interview with the Wall Street Journal. He defends a Mueller probe. He calls it appropriate and independent, and says this in part: people are entitled to be frustrated. I can accept that, but at the end of the day, the public will have confidence that the cases we brought were warranted by the evidence and that it was an appropriate use of resources. I have a solemn responsibility to make sure that cases like that are pursued and prosecuted, and I'm pleased the president has been supportive of that. If you got a chance to interview Rosenstein finally, what would you ask him?
Well, I would ask him, talk about frustrating. Why hasn't he given us the McCabe memos that we've subpoenaed? Why hasn't he given us the 302s from Bruce Orr? Why hasn't he opened the FISA application, the part that we know we need to see that Chairman Nunes has talked about? Why haven't we got an update from John Huber, the U.S. attorney who's supposed to be looking into things that went on in the FBI? Why hasn't none of those things happened? And then we don't get all that information that we are entitled to get as a separate and equal branch of government, and he's a no-show, and Glenn Simpson takes the fifth? Of course we're frustrated. So I want Mr. Rosenstein to come in to answer lots of questions, like about the documents and the requests we have outstanding, but also, most importantly, about this conversation he had with Andy McCabe where he said he was thinking about recording the president.
Just 2 weeks into the job, we should also add.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Exactly right.
All right.
Exactly
Good luck
right.
this morning. You've got a big day ahead of you. Thank you very much, Congressman Jordan.
We have more of this story coming up shortly. Our headliner is John Pistol, former deputy director at the FBI. He worked with Bob Mueller for years. He will join us live coming up top of the next hour right here in America's Newsroom. Now we move to House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi trying to be the speaker. She's being used as an asset on the campaign trail, but by Republicans. Republican consultants saying that the mere mention of her name sparks a kind of response that could get voters to the polls in 19 days. Leland Viddert's tracking down that story. Hey, Leland, live in D.C. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. And they're putting a lot of money behind that thought. Despite not serving in or running for the United States Senate, Nancy Pelosi is the favorite foil in Republican Senate races. Take a look at the ads on the air now in West Virginia, Missouri, Nevada, and North Dakota.
Well, Democrat leader Nancy Pelosi and her liberal allies spent over $6 million to elect Jackie Rosen.
Claire McCaskill's gone Washington, like joining Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi supporting a national energy tax.
But votes against West Virginia and Washington. Manchin sided with Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi, voting to give amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants.
The ads are paid for by American Crossroads, co-founded by Bush-era political guru Karl Rove, who told me Pelosi is the best foil they could possibly ask for.
Not well liked, and there's a huge visceral reaction to her. So she's got a higher profile than, say, Chuck Schumer. She's seen as more active and more in the center of things than somebody like, say, Joe Biden, and she's certainly far less popular than somebody like, say, Barack or Michelle Obama.
No, this isn't the first time using an unpopular Speaker of the House as a foil. In 1996, Bill, Democrats tied then presidential candidate Bob Dole to Newt Gingrich, helping in Bill Clinton's landslide re-election.
I tell you one thing Nancy Pelosi can do, she can raise money, right? I mean, that's a big part of her.
Oh, exactly. And it's one of the reasons that Democrats say they are so willing to keep her around when she has such high unfavorables among independents. Here are the numbers. Pelosi raised $34.2 million for Democrats in the third quarter, 250 fundraising events, 29 cities. Total haul from Nancy Pelosi for the 2018 cycle, $121.7 million for Democrats. Bill, as you note, that is a lot of money, but it brings up this important question for Democrats. How much is that money worth when you already have Democratic House candidates saying they will not vote for her for Speaker. It's becoming an increasingly big issue in these swing congressional districts.
Yeah. Thank you, Leland. Well done there in D.C. Nice to see you. Leland Vitter.
Good to see you.
Well, it is the end of an era for a childhood staple as the actor who created the voices of Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch retires from Sesame Street after nearly 50 years.
Never coming back?
Never.
Well, I don't understand. You know, everything was just fine. Why does it have to be this way?
Carol Spinney, 84 years old, has voiced both characters since the show's very first episode in 1969. And although he is retiring this week, his final performances will air on HBO next year in the show's 50th season. We all grew up watching.
What a career.
These two wonderful characters.
You can work to 84? I mean, that is awesome.
Well, because he loved his job. Will you be doing this at 84?
I don't know. Come back then.
Okay.
Facebook still under intense scrutiny after accusations of allowing fake news to spread during their site on the 2016 election, not to mention a massive data breach that affected tens of millions just about a month ago. So what they are doing to get ready this time around, we'll talk to the head of their cybersecurity department live coming up in a moment.
Plus, as the Red Sox are one step closer to the World Series, but one play has got everyone talking. We're going to be talking up all the controversy.
Whoa.